Welcome to the channel. Today's story is full of surprises and real drama. Subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's dive in. I looked in the mirror, adding some blush to my cheeks and running a brush through my hair one last time. I sighed, stepped back, and slipped into the green dress I bought last month. It fit just right, not too long or too short. I still liked how my legs looked, and Michael used to compliment them all the time. Maybe that stuck with me. I slid into my heels, fastened the straps, and stood up. A quick spritz of perfume and a final swipe of dark red lipstick, and I was good to go. Okay, Jessica, are you ready for this? You still look good, girl, I said to my reflection in the mirror, trying to convince myself that I was ready for this. I'd been on a few dates, and I had to admit that they were pretty much disasters. Maybe this one would be better. I walked down the stairs and into the living room where Daniel and Sophia were playing. They were my 11-year-old twins and the love of my life. I adored these two and let them know that as often as I could. I stood there watching them play their new video game, the one their father bought them just last month. Natalie Green, our next-door neighbor who was watching them tonight while I was out, was already there and absorbed in the game as well. She was older, 19, and had been our babysitter for the past 4 years. Okay, kids, I'm ready to go now. Can you be sure to finish your homework before you go to bed? Daniel, you have that test in math tomorrow, and Sophia, you have an English quiz coming up, I said. They turned to look at me, and as usual, I saw the disapproval on Daniel's face. I didn't want to start, so I turned to Natalie and said, be sure you check their work to be sure it's done, okay? No problem, Mrs. Stone. They always do their homework for me, don't you guys? Natalie replied. Daniel turned away, not answering. I knew he was angry at me, but I couldn't give in to him. Sophia smiled and told me how nice I looked. She wasn't pleased with me either, but she was never as obvious as Daniel. The three of them turned back to the game, so I walked out and into the hall. I got my jacket and laid it over the banister, ready when Thomas came to pick me up. I walked into the kitchen and sat down at the table, less than anxious to go out tonight, but I had to get myself back into the dating game. It was really hard and so different now. It had been almost 16 years since I had gone out on a date. After all, I had been married for 18 of those years and dating my ex-husband for the 2 before that. My divorce was final 7 months ago, and this was only the 3rd time I had accepted a date. Tonight was with Thomas Taylor, a co-worker of mine at the marketing firm where I worked as an assistant, and a reasonably good-looking guy. He had been asking me out for over a month, and I finally accepted. I liked him, but that was just a friend as far as I was concerned, but I knew he wanted more. I told myself for the 10th time that maybe this was a bad idea. Maybe if things had been different, I would be engaged and probably married by now to Andrew Sanders. Andrew and Michael worked together and used to be friends. They both worked for Harrison, Reed, and Parker, a company that specialized in handling corporate mergers and acquisitions. They were investigators who dug into corporate finances and determined what obligations and debts they had and the value of their assets. It wasn't until later that I learned they were always in competition for the top spot in the company. Michael had the edge, or so most of his contemporaries said. Andrew was good but not as good as Michael. In spite of their competition, Andrew was at our house often for parties, barbecues, and the like. I knew Michael didn't like him all that much, but I had no such problems with Andrew. I knew he was single with an ex-wife who he never spoke of and no children of his own. He was friendly, always ready to lend me a hand, and always complimented me on my appearance, the way I threw a party, just very observant. Michael did confront me after one particular party where Andrew spent the entire evening standing next to me. I was surprised at Michael's attitude, and when he suggested Andrew was after something that didn't belong to him, I got angry and defended him. We didn't talk for days after that one. Andrew had been our friend for almost 3 years before it all blew up. That's when I found out how good a friend he was after all. He was the one that had my best interest at heart, and the one that made me aware of my husband's philandering. He was there for me when he brought those pictures of Michael and that blonde he was having the affair with. I didn't know her name. I never bothered to find out. Andrew had pictures and dates of the whole affair documented. He produced a private investigator's report which he paid for out of his own pocket. The whole thing was there in black and white. He admitted he did it because he had always been fond of me and was so upset when he found out about Michael that he didn't want me to be hurt any worse than I would be if it went on longer. When I confronted Michael, he blew his stack and screamed at me. He wanted to know who gave me those pictures and that report, but I wouldn't tell him. There was no reason to point to Andrew. It would only make him more defensive. He denied the whole thing, telling me he had never been unfaithful to me or our marriage, but he couldn't answer the questions I had for him. I asked him why, who she was, when he did it, and why he chose to cheat on me. He wouldn't answer me, saying none of it was true. When I showed him the pictures, he took them, glared at them with anger, and threw them on the floor, telling me that none of that ever happened. I had the proof, and he still denied it. I got so angry at him that when Andrew convinced me to take out a restraining order on him and make him move out of the house, I did. Michael was very hurt and angry when the police served it on him. He continued to deny everything right up until the time I filed for divorce. He vowed to fight it every step of the way, but I enforced the restraining order to keep him away from me and out of the house. And I got a good attorney. She was the best at divorce, and she said we had an open and shut case. The only thing I wouldn't do was refuse to let Michael see the twins. After all, he was their father, and they wouldn't understand why. I wanted to make him stay away. They complained when he didn't come home, but I tried to explain that he couldn't live there anymore. They took it hard, but I told them he would see them as often as he could. I let him know through my lawyer that I wanted him to spend time with them, and he agreed. I just wanted notice so I could be gone when he came to pick them up. During this time, Andrew was always available to go places with me, to help me with my filings and meetings with the attorney, to pick up and drop off the twins when I couldn't. He was by my side through it all. I was becoming quite fond of him, and I knew he returned the feelings. We did go out a couple of times, but we just parted at the door. That was until the court ruled on the divorce and our separation became official. The next time Andrew and I went out, I asked him to stay. The twins were with Michael for the weekend, and Andrew slept over Saturday night. We made love that first night, and I have to admit it wasn't all that good. I think it was because I was still married at the time, and I was nervous and a little guilty. After all, I hadn't been with any man other than my husband for almost 16 years, long before we were married, and then all during our marriage. One of the things I didn't like was that Andrew was very demanding. I just wanted to cuddle and make gentle love, but he was insistent. He wanted me to do things I did for Michael, but only because he enjoyed it. I certainly didn't. But I was fond of Andrew and felt it would get better as we got to know each other. After that, it did improve, but it never was as good as it was with Michael, and Andrew was always frustrated with me because of my reluctance to do those things he wanted. But it became a pattern. Michael took the kids on alternate weekends, and Andrew would sleep over. That continued until one Sunday morning, Michael came back with the twins to grab an extra pair of shoes for a trip he planned. Michael stayed outside as the twins came running up the stairs to get their things. I heard them and came out of my bedroom to ask what they were doing. As I spoke with them, Andrew came out of the room wearing his robe, and the twins saw him. I saw the shock and anger on Daniel's face, and the tear that started in Sophia's eyes. I was about to say something when Daniel ran down the stairs, his sister following. They went out the door, slamming it behind them. I had no choice but to let them go. When Michael brought the twins home that Sunday night, he came in with them, something he hadn't done since I filed the restraining order. He waited until the twins ran upstairs and then looked at me with the coldest, angriest look I had ever seen on his face. I don't want that man in this house again until we are divorced. I had 2 frightened and devastated kids on my hands this weekend because they saw that man in your bedroom. Have you no shame? Don't you know what it says to our children that you are sleeping with another man while you are still married to me? You accused me of doing the same thing, even though I was innocent. But I think now that I understand you were cheating on me with Andrew for some time and made up that story about me just so you could divorce me. Well, that was unfair and you know it. But this will stop right now, or I will go to the court and ask for full custody on the basis of your immoral behavior. Make your choice now. With that, he turned and walked quickly out the door, slamming it behind him. I stood there in total shock. What the hell was he talking about? Making up a story about him cheating with Andrew as a reason for filing for divorce? He was crazy, disturbed at the threat of losing me and his kids. Of course, that was what it was. Now I understood, but he was too angry to push now. I had to cool it with Andrew, at least in my home. We could meet at his place or go to a motel. I could do that. Actually, I could even do without Andrew until after the divorce. He was the one that enjoyed the sex more so than I did. As I said, things would have been so much simpler if Andrew had lived. But just 3 days before my divorce was final, Andrew was killed in a traffic accident. The cops told me it was a 2-vehicle crash, meaning Andrew was in his car and there was one other car involved, but that driver was never found. The cops say he was probably struck by the other car or truck, lost control, skidded off the road, and into a tree. He was killed instantly, or so they said. I wondered later why he had been on that road at that time. He was supposed to be with me to help me in my time of sorrow over my upcoming divorce. He promised me he would be there, so why was he somewhere else? I was very sad when they notified me of his death. Sad, but strangely, that was all. I wasn't sure why they contacted me, but apparently he had something in his car that mentioned me. I was very fond of Andrew and thought we might have had a future together, but I was surprised by my ability to get over him so quickly. Maybe he was just a good friend when I needed one, and nothing more. Now I'll never know for sure. The divorce was very hard on me. The funeral was scheduled for the same day as my divorce, and Andrew had planned on being there with me. Now I had no choice but to go to the funeral alone. I was surprised at the lack of people there. I was one of only a very few, and most of them people I had never met. It was a simple and quick affair, a few words, and then it was over. Since I knew no one there, I left immediately and went on to the divorce. Michael was there with his attorney, and he was sitting across from me looking at the wall behind me. I could see he was still angry, and I was still surprised. After what he did, why would he be angry at me? It made no sense. But he chose to agree to the divorce when Andrew threatened to post some of the pictures on the internet for the world to see. Andrew told me Michael agreed rather than have those pictures out. Michael never told me anything about that meeting, so I had only Andrew's word. As I took my seat, Michael finally looked at me. I was shocked at the look in his eyes. They were as cold and angry as I had ever seen. I wanted to say something to him, something that would make him see that this was all his fault, but I couldn't think of anything more to say other than what I said to him when I confronted him. He refused to admit his guilt then, so now would be no different. I shook my head and looked away, not feeling comfortable with that look. Michael continued to stare at me until he said very quietly, "Are you still convinced I cheated on you? You believe I could do something like that to you and my kids? I will say it one more time, I never cheated on you. Never." I looked into those eyes that were so cold and answered him the only way I could. "I have the proof, and you still won't admit it. So long as you choose to lie to me and not admit what you did, we have no marriage." I had been very sure of myself when Andrew was there to support me, but seeing the look in his eyes and the sound of his voice, my confidence was shaken. What if, then we have no marriage? Michael looked away, and the anger on his face was so intense it scared me. But I was safe here in this room. Actually, if truth be told, I knew I was safe anyway. Michael would never hit me. The man he was couldn't do that. The meeting went very quickly, and the attorneys gave us the final paperwork to sign. I was to keep the house, get half of all assets, child support from Michael in the amount of $700 per month, and alimony of $150 per month since I was working and made sufficient money to support myself. The alimony amount was a compromise. Michael wanted to refuse to pay anything to me, claiming that I had created a false set of documents to force the divorce. He claimed that Andrew and I were lovers and working in collusion to blame him for an affair that never happened. The judge denied his suit when she read the private investigator's report and viewed some of the pictures. I have to admit that I still don't understand Michael's claim that Andrew and I were lovers. I never even dated Andrew until after I filed for divorce, and I only slept with him once our separation was official and our marriage had been ruled over. That happened after Michael's suit had been denied. So where he came up with those accusations was beyond me, not like my claim based on real evidence. I know Michael still believes what he said in that countersuit. I never tried to correct him, it would have been a waste of time. I was interrupted by the doorbell. I got up, walked into the foyer to see that Natalie had already opened the door. Thomas was standing inside, dressed very nicely in a dark suit and a beautiful green striped tie. He was a nice-looking man and always made a nice impression. My twins had not come out of the room. As usual, they disapproved of my dating. They always asked why Daddy wasn't the one I was going out with. I always answered the same way: Daddy and I are divorced and no longer together. They never accepted it. Okay, good night, kids. I won't be late. Be good and do your homework, I said. I grabbed my jacket, handed it to Thomas to assist me, and shrugged into it. I went out to his car, Thomas following. Thomas took me to dinner at a very nice restaurant where we ate and talked about our lives. Thomas was divorced like me, and he had a daughter at home that he adored. He visited her as often as he could. I looked at pictures of him and her, and one of all three of them. His wife was a very beautiful woman. I asked him what the cause of the divorce was in his case, and he said he didn't want to talk about it, so I never mentioned it again. After dinner, we went to a small lounge where there was dancing, music, and plenty of drinks. I loved dancing and enjoyed Thomas' ability. He was a wonderful dancer, but I noticed that after a few drinks and some slow dances, he was trying to pull me into having sex. I resisted until he finally stopped. What's the problem, Jessica? I know you've been without Michael for quite a while now, and you must want the same thing I want. So why not? We're both divorced, lonely, and need some real loving. I won't disappoint you with that, Thomas said, running his hand down my back. He pulled my body tight against him, trying to arouse me. I stepped on his toe, making him back off, and then moved away and back to our table. I was angry, embarrassed, and frustrated. I enjoyed the feel of him against me, but it was not the same. Michael used to do the same thing when we danced, but he was smoother and more playful about it. He knew I loved dancing and wouldn't even suggest anything like that until we were ready to go home. What was wrong with Thomas? Thomas followed me back to the table, looking angry as well. What the hell was that all about? I was just trying to let you know that I find you very attractive, and I would love to make love to you. Isn't that what you want too? No. This was supposed to be a friendly date, nothing more. I never gave you any other impression. I never told you or even suggested to you that I wanted sex. Damn you, I want to go home now, I replied. Thomas argued, tried to convince me he would behave, but I just wanted to go home. Damn it all anyway. Why did I end up comparing guys to Michael? I always did it, and I never intended to, but they just weren't the same as him. He did everything right. He always knew what I wanted and what would make me happy. As Thomas drove me home, silent in his frustration, I continued to think of what was wrong. I knew what it was, and that made it even worse. I still loved my husband, Michael, regardless of what he did to me and our children. He was perfect in so many ways for me. He knew me, he took care of me, and he always knew how to make me happy. Why did he do it? Why did he cheat on me with that woman? I didn't even know her name or where she came from. Andrew knew. He took care of all the details during the divorce. He gave the lawyer all the information, and Michael continued to deny it over and over. He even begged me to listen to him, to believe him when he denied it. But I saw those pictures, the ones that broke my heart. I saw him on top of her. As Thomas pulled into the driveway, I opened the door, telling him there was no need to walk me to the door. I was still angry and frustrated, and I wanted nothing more than to get into the house. I was so intent, I didn't even notice Michael's car in the driveway. I guess after 15 years of something, it just fit and didn't even alert me. I walked rapidly up the walk and opened the front door, letting myself in. Thomas had already backed out, and I heard the angry sound of his tires as he drove away. I took off my coat, hung it in the hall closet, and walked into the family room where I expected to see my twins and Natalie playing as usual. What I found was Michael with both kids wrapped around him as they played on the floor. Natalie was sitting on the couch, laughing out loud as they tried to get the game controller from him. I was struck by the joy on their faces and their happy laughter matched by the smile on his, and I couldn't help but smile as I watched them, unable to move or speak, overcome with the pleasure it gave me. As Michael rolled away, the controller held high, he saw me standing there in the doorway. His smile disappeared like a light switch had been flipped off. He stopped immediately and got up from the floor, telling the kids that the game was over. They didn't stop right away, not knowing I was there. Michael grabbed both of them by the shoulder and turned them so they could see me standing there. I was still grinning at them, but I suddenly noticed that I was the only one still smiling. All the joy and laughter was gone, the silence following the laughter deafening. Suddenly, I felt it all come crashing down on Meth Pain, the lack of joy in our house with Michael gone, the sadness I felt every night when I went to bed alone. All of it came crashing down, almost driving me to my knees. I was just standing there, not able to say anything, when Michael spoke. "Okay, kids, it's time for me to go. I'll pick you up right at 10 tomorrow morning. Be ready, okay?" With that, he spoke to Natalie and then walked past me and out the door without a word. I watched him go with mixed emotions. He wasn't supposed to be here without notifying me, but then I realized I had told him I would be out this evening. He probably didn't expect to find me home so early. "Thanks a lot, Mom. You weren't supposed to be here this early. Dad and us were having a lot of fun together until you ruined it." "Thanks a lot," Daniel said angrily as he picked up the controller and turned the game off. He said good night to Natalie and then, followed by Sophia, walked out and up the stairs to their rooms. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Stone. Mr. Stone called to ask if you had gone out, and when I told him you had left, he came over to play with the twins. It was okay, wasn't it? You just told me he wasn't supposed to be here when you were. I'm sorry if I did something wrong." "I didn't mean to," Natalie said, looking concerned. No, Natalie. You did nothing wrong, and you're right. He isn't supposed to be here when I am, but you couldn't know I was coming home so early, and neither could he. So it's all right. It's fine. You can go home now," I replied. I paid her and walked her to the door. "Thanks, Natalie. I'll call when I need you again. Good night." I stood there in the hallway of my home, alone as it seemed I was more and more. My children were angry with me, my babysitter was afraid she had done something wrong, and my ex-husband had walked out without a word to me. The joy and the laughter I saw when I first came in was missing from our home now and had been since I confronted Michael with his infidelity. But what bothered me the most was that while he was the one that created the problem, I was the one paying the price, and it was a steep price to pay. I slowly walked up the stairs to my empty bed and stripped out of my new dress. I washed my face of the makeup I had applied so carefully and let my hair down, the elaborate hairdo I began the evening with forgotten. All of that care for what? A date with a man who wanted nothing more than to get into my panties for some satisfaction for him, of course, not for me. I sighed, turned out the light, and pulled the covers over me. The last thoughts I had before I fell asleep were about the laughter I saw earlier. I was sitting at the kitchen table the next morning, a Saturday, when the doorbell rang, and the kids went to get it. It was Michael, coming to pick up the kids as usual. He would wait outside for them to get their bags for the weekend stayover. I normally remained in the kitchen during this transition, but today I felt the urge to see Michael. I wanted to see him relaxed and ready for 2 days with our twins. Without thinking of the consequences, I rose and walked into the foyer. I went to the door, opened the storm door, and saw him sitting on the steps. I spoke as he turned. "Good morning, Michael. How have you been?" I said. He said nothing, just looked up at me. I was surprised at how well he looked. Unlike me, the divorce hadn't seemed to bother him much. But then, he was probably sleeping with his new girlfriend regularly, and it seemed to be good for him. He stood, then turned around and looked away. "I've been doing okay. Work's good. Business is up, so things are good. You?" he replied. "I'm okay too, I guess. I'm sorry about last night. I should have called to let Natalie know I was coming home early." "It wasn't your fault or Natalie's," I said. "Yeah, okay. I was just spending a little time with the kids since I was at loose ends." "I'll be more careful in the future," he said. "Please, Michael, it wasn't a problem. You don't have to do anything different. It was my mistake the date first, and then not calling," I said. As I was about to explain about the date, the twins came running out the door and grabbing their dad, ran to the car. Michael went with them as if my words were unimportant. As I watched them together, I realized that they probably were. They turned to wave goodbye as I watched them get in. They seemed so happy with him, more so than with me. I didn't seem to be able to get them to have fun anymore. I wish I knew why. I went back in, dreading the weekend without my kids. They were my only salvation now. where I used to love the weekends, Michael and I sleeping late and listening to the kids downstairs on their PlayStation or watching cartoons or just having fun. Now it was just me. If they weren't with Michael for his weekend, they were gone to practice for something or other. This weekend was typical. With Michael gone, Andrew gone, and now Danielle and Sophia with their dad, it was just me. The day promising to be very empty. I spent the remainder of that day reflecting on my life. I was alone now, only my kids to keep me company. I worked at a job I didn't particularly like. I slept alone. I only dated occasionally since most of the guys I met were usually married or not candidates for anything other than one-night stands. I managed to survive the 2 days, and on Sunday, fixed a small dinner, knowing the kids would be home, but that Michael would probably feed them before coming back. He usually did that, taking the time to talk to them and make plans for the next weekend they would spend together. They always came home filled with plans and excited about the next time with their dad. I admit to being jealous. When the kids came home, they talked a little about their weekend but didn't give me any details. More and more, they seemed to consider their time with Michael as their time, not mine. I seemed to find myself more and more closed off from them. I made sure they were ready for school the following day and sent them off to bed. Bored, I soon followed and laid out my clothes for tomorrow, ready for my job. I worked at the bank until 5 days a week, with Saturday and Sunday off. And I had just gotten home that Monday when I heard the phone ringing. I used my key to open the door, and rushing in, I dropped my stuff, ran into the kitchen to grab the phone before the caller hung up. "Hello, this is Jessica," I answered. "Is this Mrs. Stone? Mrs. Michael Stone?" a voice said. I didn't recognize the voice at all. "I'm Jessica Stone. I'm divorced now, so it's no longer Mrs. Michael Stone. Can I help you?" I replied. "Yeah, maybe you can. Look, this is Henry Brown down at Global Insights. Andrew hired me to make up that report, the one that you used to dump your old man. Looks like it worked okay since you're split now. I'm sorry, but I don't know much about you or the report, only what Andrew told me." "Why are you calling me?" he said. "Look, lady, it's too bad he had to bite the dust, but Andrew still owed me $2,000 for making up that report. Doctoring those pictures alone cost me a couple of $100. Now that you're out from under that creep of a husband of yours, someone has to pay me the $2,000. Since he's gone, you're the only one left," he said. "I don't know what you're talking about. Andrew said he paid for that report out of his own pocket." "And what do you mean, doctoring those pictures? Why did you have to do anything to them?" I asked. "Don't be funny with me, lady. That report was bogus, and you know it. Those pictures were photoshopped by one of my guys, so don't give me any of that crap. I want my $2,000, or the DA will hear about your scam from an anonymous source. I'm covered, so nothing comes back to me. But you, that's a different story. You wanted to dump that cheap SOB and get half of his money, so you had your lover hire me. I have his words on tape telling me that the two of you planned this. So we'll stop by tomorrow around noon for the $2,000. Have it waiting if you know what's good for you," he said. He disconnected, and I sat there, the phone still against my ear as the dial tone hummed. I was stunned. The report was bogus. The pictures were not real. It was all a scam, and Andrew was the one that did it all. He conned me, all right. He made up that whole thing about Michael having an affair and got a sleazy PI to make up a false report, complete with pictures, to convince me. And the worst part was that I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. I turned on my husband and refused to even consider that he was telling me the truth. I put down the phone and sat there, my head spinning, my stomach clenching in severe pain, my face flushed. I was feeling sick to my stomach and almost didn't make it to the bathroom before everything I had came up, scalding my throat and mouth as it spewed out. I know I screamed in agony as the truth came crashing down on me. All I could say was no, over and over and over. I tried to get up, away from the commode, but when I stood, my stomach clenched again, the pain forcing me to my knees just in time for another round of heaves, mostly dry since the contents of my stomach were already in the bowl. I bent over, the cramps not letting go, my face drenched with sweat, and my fists clenched in agony as I tried to bring up whatever was left. Each time I tried to get up to wash my mouth of the sick taste, it hit me all over again. My kids found me there on the floor of the bathroom when they came home from school. I had been there for the past 2 hours, alternately seized by dry heaves, washing my face, then crying until the next spasm took control. My stomach was empty now, and the only thing left were the painful cramps that wouldn't stop. I felt like I wanted to die and hoped that I would. They did the only thing they could think of. They called Michael and told him I was very sick. I wanted to die now for sure. With Daniel's help, I got up and half walked, half crawled up the stairs to the bedroom. I wanted to just lie down on the bed and let sleep claim me, but Daniel got a wet washcloth and bathed my pale, ashen face. He looked so worried, and that made me try to take some control of myself. I couldn't let my child suffer for my sins. I had to ease his mind. Thanks, Daniel. It'll be okay now. Please go call your dad and tell him not to come. I don't want to see him now. Please, Daniel, please go, I said. But Mom, you're sick. You need someone to help you, and Sophia and I don't know what to do. Dad will know. He'll take care of you, Daniel replied. No, Daniel, listen to me now. I don't want your dad here. Do you hear me? Not your dad. Now do as I told you, call him, tell him not to come. No, wait, better yet, let him come and then you and your sister go with him and stay there until I call you. Now go, I said. I got myself up, pushed my son out the door in spite of his yelling, and locked it behind him. I couldn't stand the thought of facing any of them right now, maybe never again. I was humiliated, and the emotional pain was so intense I was making myself physically sick. I couldn't let Michael or my kids see that. I couldn't. I sank down on the bed, my stomach quiet for the moment. I wiped the back of my hand across my mouth, tasting the sour bite of vomit. I bowed my head, let the tears come, and I cried. I couldn't stop myself. What I had done to my family by believing Andrew's story of Michael's infidelity was clear now. I knew it for what it was, a fabrication built up with fake pictures and a fake report about some woman who didn't even exist. And I swallowed it all of it. In spite of living with my husband for almost 16 years, I never even thought to question the story Andrew brought me and the warning Michael gave me about Andrew so long ago. I just ignored that as well. I bought everything he told me at the cost of my marriage and my family. As I sat there, I heard the sound of voices coming from downstairs. I waited, praying that they would all go and leave me here alone. I couldn't stand to face anyone tonight. I definitely couldn't face Michael, but then Michael never wanted to look at me now anyway. He hadn't for some time, and now, knowing what I did, I couldn't blame him. He must hate me, and I now knew why. He always looked at me with those accusing eyes. Pounding on the door. Jessica, let me in. Open the door, Jessica. Jessica. It was Michael, trying to get me to open the door. I couldn't. I just couldn't do that. I had to make him go away. I'm fine, Michael. Just take the kids and go. You can keep them for a few days. They'll call you tomorrow. Please, Michael, just go away, I said. Jessica, Daniel said you were sick. He and Sophia said you were very sick. Let me in, Jessica. You're scaring the kids now. Please let me in, he said. I couldn't do that to my kids. I had to do something. I sat up, wiped my face with the wet washcloth Daniel had given me, and walked slowly to the door. If I could just make it through the next few minutes, Michael would take the twins and go. I would be alone. Fine. Just a minute, I said. I squared my shoulders, took a deep breath, brushed my hair back from my face, and opened the door. Okay, Michael, are you satisfied now? I'm fine. Now please, just take Daniel and Sophia and go back to your place for a couple of days. It'll be fine if you just give me a couple of days. Please, Michael. Michael stood there, staring at me as if I was a complete stranger. I held his eyes for a few seconds before looking away, trying to find my children. They were standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking very small and frightened. I couldn't stand that, so I walked out of the room and over to the top of the stairs. Honestly, kids, I'm fine. I must have a bug or something, and I just don't want you two to catch it from me. So if you stay with your dad, you should be safe. I can take care of myself, so are we okay? I waited until I saw them nod, then turned back to Michael and said very softly, Please, Michael, just take them and go. I have to be alone right now. If you ever cared for me, please just do this for me. Please. Michael looked at me and reached out to take my hand in his. Jessica, you're in some kind of trouble. Let me help you. You're still the mother of my children. I don't give a damn if you die, but you're scaring my kids. I looked into his eyes, saw that small kernel of concern, and that was all I could stand. I began to cry as I ran into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. I twisted the pathetic lock and stood there, my back pressed against the door as if to block him from coming in. I waited, but he didn't make further attempts. He walked away. I heard voices again, and then the door closed when they left. I stayed as I was until I heard the car pull out, and opening the door slowly, I listened to the silence. They were gone. That night was hell for me as I finally understood everything. I spent the next several days at work, doing the mindless job that I was beginning to hate, then returning home to sit and stare at the wall, trying to understand how I had been so gullible, so willing to believe something so horrible about the only man I had ever loved. And yes, now that I was forced to see the truth, I realized that I had loved him all along. That's why the sex with Andrew never really felt good, why my sadness over his death had passed so quickly, why the dates with men I thought were fine always left me with an empty feeling. That's why Thomas left in a huff on our date. I was comparing him to Michael, and he wasn't Michael. None of them were, even Andrew. Why hadn't I understood that before now? I paid the man his $2,000 on Tuesday and asked him for the truth. He told me what Andrew had requested of him, that the girl was just some hooker they picked up off the street, the backgrounds lifted from the internet, and the report was just a complete fabrication using dates and places supplied by Andrew. He had a photographer take some pictures of Michael without his knowledge and used his face with the pictures of another man with the hooker. Since Andrew knew Michael's schedule, he was the perfect one to set it up. And he did it all just to take me away from Michael, to best Michael at something because of his jealousy. He knew Michael was to be promoted very soon, and he would end up working for him, so he wanted to take me away first. And he succeeded. I let him make a fool out of me and cheat Michael out of my love. And if he hadn't died in that freak car accident, I never would have known. It was Thursday before I called Michael to tell him he could bring the children home, but I requested that he stop and see me beforehand. I told him I had something I wanted to talk to him about, and that the children couldn't be a part of. He was curious, but all I would say was that it would be something he needed to know. He agreed finally, but reluctantly. I had debated about what I should do, and I knew one thing: I had to tell Michael the truth about everything. He had to know that I believed him and that I knew he had never cheated on me. It was important for me to let him know that I had regained my trust in him and recognized the decency that made him the man he was. While I couldn't take those things away from him, I could let him know that I now realized I should never have doubted him. He deserved that from me, at least. Friday, Michael called and asked if we could meet at home that evening. He said we could talk, I could say what I wanted, and then we could decide if the kids should stay with him over the weekend. He was very quiet, not the least bit rude or abrupt as he normally was when he called. I appreciated that small token and agreed to meet him. He said he would bring takeout, something we used to do quite often. I thanked him and hung up, determined but frightened of what I was about to do. I finished my shift at the bank and left for home and my coming humiliation. Michael arrived right at 6, the time we had agreed to. He had a pizza and some Diet Pepsis that he sat on the kitchen table. I got the napkins and a couple of glasses and set 2 places, very domestic and very family-oriented. The hypocrisy was not lost on his artificial domesticity, and my intended confession of unmitigated deceit and betrayal. I'd almost lost my courage, but I steeled myself and indicated to Michael that he should sit. I set the pizza on our plates, opened and poured the Pepsi. After that, I sat back and looked at Michael. I have something very difficult to say to you, and I need a promise from you that you will listen until I'm finished. If you try to interrupt or to ask questions before I'm done, I won't be able to get through this. This is important, Michael, so you have to promise me, I said. Michael looked at me, and I guess the pain on my face convinced him that I needed to do this. He finally nodded and gestured for me to begin. I swallowed, said a quick prayer for help, and began. First, I want to apologize to you for not believing in you when you tried to tell me you would never do the things I accused you of. That was my biggest sin and one I will regret until the day I die. All you asked of me was faith and trust, and I gave you either, I said. Michael started to say something, and I quickly raised my hand. Please, Michael, you promised. He subsided, and I continued. Before filing for the divorce, I let Andrew convince me to bar you from seeing the children and living here in the house. I now know he did that to prevent you from talking to me and trying to convince me you didn't do those things. My sin is that I listened to him and not to you. When Andrew moved in with me to sleep in the bed you and I shared for all those years, I was so angry that I permitted it. We spent the weekends together when you had the kids. I was humiliated and ashamed when you spoke to me that day Daniel saw me with Andrew, and I realized what I was doing was wrong. The shame was only made worse when Andrew decided to use a motel room instead, but I continued to meet him. That was when I lost the dignity that I had tried so hard to maintain when I thought you had betrayed me for another woman. To make it so much worse, Andrew was a terrible lover, and all I could do was compare him to you. For your information, and because I owe you the truth, he was awful, and I never enjoyed it. Why I continued, I don't understand. I guess I was lonely and felt betrayed. I think now it was only a foolish way for me to try to get some revenge, I said, pushing the plate of pizza away from me. The smell almost caused my nausea to return. I had to continue this, do it once and for all, make it through before my courage failed me. It was just last weekend when you had the kids that I got a phone call from Henry Brown, the man at Global Insights. You remember the PI report that documented your betrayal of us, the report that produced those dramatic pictures of you and that woman, the report that convinced the judge that your claims were just nonsense. Do you remember that report? I asked. I was almost yelling now, the pain and the anger gripping me again just as it had when he called. My throat closed up, and I could hardly speak. I was so furious at the injustice of what I learned. Michael stood and reached for me, but I angrily waved him back. No, I have to do this. I have to, I said. I took a deep breath, held it, and then exhaled noisily. It was all a sham, a pack of lies. Andrew paid him to create those pictures and to doctor the report, and make it look authentic. Andrew paid him. Andrew did it all just to take me away from you, and he succeeded. He succeeded because I failed to trust you. Don't you see? It was all my fault. I destroyed our marriage by my failure to believe in you. The foolish man called me to ask for an additional $2,000 that Andrew owed him. Andrew told him that he and I were in agreement to fake the report and the pictures. He had a tape of Andrew making the request to fabricate the report, and he claimed that I was aware and in agreement. It was nothing but a con that Andrew used to take me away. Just a lie. It was all a damn lie, and I found out because Andrew was killed that day in that stupid car accident. I now thank God that he was. The day I learned all of this was the day the children called you because I was so sick. I was sick at heart, but the pain was enough to bring me down. That's why I had you leave so quickly. I couldn't stand to face you, and I couldn't stand for you to look at me, knowing I had failed you and betrayed you in my anger. I made it all the way through. I had given Michael the truth so that he could know that I believed him now, that I knew without doubt that he had never betrayed me. But it was also true that he knew how I betrayed him. It was all over now. Michael could go on with our children, knowing that he had my trust, but now he knew that I had slept with Andrew repeatedly while we were separated. I had betrayed my marriage vows to Michael long before our marriage was terminated. We were separated but not divorced. I had betrayed him, and now I knew I didn't even have the justification of revenge. I was exhausted. The truth and the emotional toll it demanded of me to tell Michael took more from me than I expected. I was drenched with sweat, my face pale, and my hands shaking with emotion. I reached for the forgotten Pepsi to quench my parched throat. So now you know it all. That Andrew betrayed both of us, and that you never failed me while I did fail you. It was so easy for him, and I was so ready to accept the lie. What does that say about me? I don't want to think about it. Just know that I never stopped loving you, even when I was convinced that you had cheated on me. I never stopped, Michael. I never stopped, I said. I stood, looked at Michael who was sitting there, quiet now. He seemed to be deep in thought. I decided to take this reprieve to say, please keep the twins until Sunday evening as usual. I can't see them right now. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm so very, very sorry for all I put you through. I hope someday you'll be able to forgive me. Good night. I turned and ran up the stairs to the bedroom, where I seemed to be spending more and more of my time lately. I heard Michael call through the door that he was leaving, but I didn't respond. I wanted to be by myself. It was only now that I realized that I had destroyed all the good things in my life. I had been a fool, a gullible fool, to allow Andrew to lead me by the nose as he did. And I deserved what I got now. I deserved nothing less. Michael brought the twins home that Sunday evening at the proper time, and I had a light dinner waiting. He came in with them just to be sure I was okay. I smiled at him but didn't stay to talk. I walked back into the kitchen, Michael standing there in the foyer watching me until I was out of sight. He left, calling a good night to the twins as he left. 2 weeks passed in which I worked very hard to get the twins to talk to me, to tell me what they were doing and how they were getting along. It seemed that it had been forever since I just talked to them, and took a real interest in what they were doing. Up till then, I was feeling sorry for myself, put upon by the death of my lover, the destruction of my marriage, and anything else I could feel some self-pity about. Now I was determined to make myself get back into the world of the living. My kids came first. I was discussing something with them when they reminded me that Michael was coming to pick them up that Saturday morning. I had almost forgotten until then, and the thought of Michael brought a wave of pain for all I had lost. I fought it back and told them that was fine and that I would be sure they had all they needed. Daniel wanted his favorite shirt clean, and Sophia wanted a change of shorts for the park. I promised that both would be ready. They seemed pleased that I was taking an interest again, and we talked about what they were going to do. Apparently, Michael had promised them a trip to the planetarium to see a new diorama that was just being introduced. It sounded wonderful, and I told them so. I envied them this time with their dad. I had them ready, their small bags packed with their special requests, and made sure they each had last-minute instructions on how to behave. I knew it was not necessary, as they always behaved for their father, but it gave me some sense of normalcy, and they seemed to like it as they smiled and fidgeted good-naturedly while assuring me they would behave. I was pleased at the ease with which we were now getting along. It seemed that when I bared my soul to Michael and told him what I did, I regained some of my own pride and self-respect. It wasn't easy, but it was very worthwhile. I felt a huge sense of relief and pleasure, which seemed to be apparent to my children. At least they were responding to me now, whereas before there was more resentment. I waited with them until Michael's car pulled into our driveway. I opened the door and watched them run to the car, where Michael stood waiting. He got them inside, made sure they were buckled up, and then, surprising me as well as the twins, he walked up the driveway toward me. I waited, wondering what he wanted to say. I had no expectations, but I was curious. I felt maybe we had entered a new phase in our relationship, possibly friends, but I suspected even that was too much to hope for. "Good morning, Jessica. Are you feeling better now?" he asked. "I'm a lot better now." It was very hard, but it was more painful to realize what I did and the harm it caused for all of us. But it's given me a great sense of peace now that you know that I know the truth. "Thank you for that," I replied. Michael turned and started down the drive, then he stopped. I watched, curious as to what he had forgotten, something else he wanted to say. He turned, walked back to the bottom of the stairs, and looked up at me. I waited, feeling the pleasant twinge in my stomach that I always felt when Michael looked at me that way. I could only wish it was the way he felt about me again, but that was too much to ask for. He opened his mouth once, shut it, swallowed, then spoke. "Would you like to join us today? We're going to the planetarium, and I know the twins would really like it if you came." All I could do was sob, the tears welling up in my eyes and my throat closing with emotion. I swallowed, wiped my eyes, and replied, "I would love to." It's been almost a year since Michael invited me to join him and our twins for his weekends with them. It's not always that he does it, but often enough that I was beginning to hope for more. I know I don't deserve it, but I can still hope that he can come to forgive me. We spoke about it at length once, and Michael was very kind to me. He understood why I was so convinced when he saw the pictures and read the report. He knew that both were fakes, but there was no way to convince me at that time since I thought they were real. And we now knew that Andrew was the worst kind of predator, taking advantage of every possibility. He was driven by jealousy and envy. The problem was that while intellectually, Michael could understand my suspicions, his heart wasn't as forgiving. He said only that he was sorry I couldn't trust him more, especially when he told me that he was innocent. I've done all I could to make him understand that even though I thought he was unfaithful to me, I never stopped loving him. I let him know that my time with Andrew was not wonderful, that the sex with him was always unsatisfactory, and that I continued to always compare him with Michael and that Andrew always came off second best in every way. As to dating, it was hopeless for me since I continued to compare them all to Michael. He hears me, he listens very intently, but he just shakes his head. I don't know what that means. The one thing he did say during that talk was that if I still loved him as I said, why didn't I give our marriage another chance? Why couldn't I find it within my heart to forgive him for what I thought he did? I had no answer to that, and that bothered me a lot. I finally concluded that Andrew was manipulating me into not letting Michael back in my life. Michael agreed but still wondered why I was so eager to push him away. I never asked Michael about his time away from me and the twins during the week when we both worked. There was no communication. We hadn't come to the point where we could pick up the phone and just chat as friends. We weren't real friends. We were a divorced couple who shared custody of their children, and that was still our situation even now. I tried in every way I knew to let Michael know that I was sorry and that if given the chance, I would do all I could to repair the damage I did to our marriage. He seems to understand that, and he sometimes says things that lead me to think that maybe, oh well, just maybe. Things finally came to a conclusion one Sunday after Michael had returned with the twins from a day when he didn't ask me to join them. It was a long weekend for me, wondering what they were doing and why they didn't ask me to join them. I told myself that it was nothing, just Michael wanting to spend some quality time alone with them. I convinced myself of that by the time they came home. Michael stayed outside and soon left without saying goodbye or coming in to chat. I noticed that he was doing that more and more. I spoke to Daniel and Sophia that evening and casually asked them what they did that day. We were on good terms again, and we did often talk about their time with Michael. This time, I caught the look that passed between Daniel and Sophia before Sophia spoke. Mom, we talked it over between us, and we have to say something. We promised Dad that we wouldn't, but we don't think that's fair to you cause we love both of you the same, she said, looking once more at her brother before continuing. Dad has a girlfriend. Her name is Sarah, and she's very nice. She has a daughter, Megan, who is our age, and the five of us have been spending a lot of weekends together. Sophia looked at Daniel, and he nodded. He picked up where Sophia stopped. I had stopped breathing, dreading what was coming. This weekend was a lot of fun. We went to a cabin at River Valley and spent the whole weekend there with Sarah and Megan. We think Dad and Sarah were together at night, but we aren't sure. They didn't say anything about it. Daniel seemed to be embarrassed, but he swallowed and continued. I held my breath because I knew what was coming. I steeled myself, gripping my hands so tightly that my fingernails were digging into my palm. My throat was already tight, and my eyes were beginning to blur with the tears that I just barely held back. But Dad did talk to Sophia and me and told us he wanted to ask Sarah to marry him. He wanted our opinion of that and to be sure how we felt about her. He said he would talk to you about it before he asked her. There it was. Done. It was over now, once and for all. My hopes and my prayers weren't answered. Even from the grave, Andrew won. He destroyed Michael's love for me and left me behind with nothing but the ashes of 16 years. He must be laughing now. He must think that he had accomplished his purpose. But the joke was on him. Michael was happy again. He had found someone else to replace me, someone who would believe in him. After all, wasn't I the one that refused to believe that he might be telling the truth? And as I thought about it, I realized that I was the only one that lost. Andrew destroyed me and my marriage, but not the man he hated and envied. Andrew lost his life without knowing he had failed. How ironic. I lost everything, and the pain of my choice to believe Andrew over Michael was mine to bear. The price for my betrayal and my lack of trust in my husband and my marriage was due in full. All I could do now was pay that price. Thanks for watching. Can trust ever truly be repaired once broken? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. See you next time.